promised you I was gonna tell you how we came up with that $4.9 million. So this is gonna be a couple slides to walk you through that calculation, because it takes a little time. So going back to where we started, state budget did not include an inflationary increase for the last 2 years, and we don't know what the next 2 year state budget's gonna have. So we've got 4 years of unknown, or 4 years of inflation to compensate for. That's what we're looking at. Our current revenue limit is what the state puts on us that sets a cap on what we can get, the combination of state aid and property taxes. So if the revenue limit doesn't change, we can't increase property taxes. So we can't make the decision to increase taxes. You have to, as a community, make that decision to increase our taxes. That's what the referendum does. So right now, our revenue limit is just over $10,000 per student, almost $10,150 per resident student. And I need to make my disclaimer on students. That's resident students, not open enrollment students. Open enrollment students, as a taxpayer, you do not pay a penny in property tax for open enrollment students. Their resident district pays us for their tuition. So the count for this is just our residents. Yes, good question.
Will their districts be paying for the increase? Because every student has an increase. So will their districts be paying an additional fee for their increase as well?
So that number is set by the state, but it's tied to how school spending is going. So yes, there'll be an increase in that, and we're already anticipating that, but we don't know exactly what it is yet. They haven't calculated that. They do that after they get final financial numbers at the end of June. So then we will know at the start of next year what that increase is. So yes, they will. The resident districts on those open enrollment students will be paying more next year than they paid this year, and they paid more this year than they did last year. So that does get factored in, and there's an inflationary adjustment in that. It's connected directly to the private school choice vouchers as well. So those go up every year automatically with that. So yes, they will push resident districts.
So is that the private school voucher? Is that how much Ashwaubenon has to pay to send its students
to a private
school?
Yeah, to a parochial school, yes.
So this would be, does this referendum cover those students as well?
This referendum does not cover what? No, it does not cover those students, so that amount is set just like open enrollment. So basically, the state comes in at the time we set our levy and says, okay, this is how much you're gonna pay in tuition for those private school voucher students, and they add that onto our revenue limit, just the whole dollar. So they don't tell us how many students or where they're going, they just say, as a district, this year it was about $300,000. You need to levy $300,000 more than your revenue limit. We're gonna let you have, as an exception on your revenue limit, so you can levy that, and you're gonna pay, and then you're going to pay that directly to those private schools. So the state does the transfer for us.
So that's a good point, because that will comes off. We get paid, as residents, all of us pay for that $300,000.
Yes.
Is there an estimate of what that increase is going to be?
There is not an estimate at this point. I anticipate the open enrollment amount will go up about $250, but that's me doing a calculation, and it's really a calculation that's based on all state spending. So it really depends on if districts overspend or underspend what they have in their official budget. So it could be, I've seen years where it's been up over $400 or $500, and I've seen years where it's less than $100. I think in this inflationary scenario, you're gonna see districts spending more, so it's probably higher than that, but I don't know that.
Does that like $200 and some dollars, if that is the number, does that cover that student?
That covers that student, because that parochial school, we only pay them the amount of that tuition is. So that locks it in. That's all the parochial school gets from us. I don't know if the parochial school can still charge tuition to those students or how they do that. We're not privy to that information. They really don't share a lot of that information. They tell us this is how much we owe for all the parochial schools where we have kids taking a private school voucher, and the state does the transfer, takes it out of our revenue, puts it in their revenue.
Sorry, I was asking about the estimate for the increase for the open enrollment.
Yes.
So are they? That's the.
They're connected. So
okay.
if one goes up $200, the other goes up $200. So it's the same amount between the vouchers and the open enrollment students. The increases are the same. So going back to how did we calculate the increase? $10,150, to use a round number, is what we're getting per student in our revenue limit right now. We didn't get an increase the last 2 years, so in 2020, inflation was 1.23%. So 1.23% of this would be a $125 increase in our revenue limit. In 2021, the inflation calculated out to 4.7%. So 4.7% of the new number of these two combined gets us to $483. of an increase. For 2022, in here, we had an estimate of 8.2% when we did this calculation. It's coming a little lower than that. That came up to $882. So what happens if we lower it to the 8% where it came in? $860. So I'm showing you where we started. When we started this process in August or September, we've lowered the amount a little bit. In 2023, we are estimating inflation to be about 7%. We don't know where that's going to be, but it seems like it's tracking a little lower than where it was this fall. So if we lower that estimate to 6%, we see it drop down from $814 to $698. So we're in that same ballpark. So bottom line, our original estimate showed $2,305 approximately per student is what we need to keep up with inflation. And we're seeing our costs go up that inflationary amount. With the revised number, it's $2,167. So very close between the two, but we're showing you where we started and where we are now with the updated with the yellow. So let's go.
I think that's important because we want to be extremely transparent. We want everyone to clearly know that we are going to be as accurate in our estimates as we possibly can. In fact, if you look back to the previous referendums, we ended up, our mill rate was significantly less than what we told our taxpayers it was going to be. And so we want to be totally transparent. If it drops down to 5%, we'll lower it down to 5%. So just want to make sure.
So before you switch real quick, so the bottom line is $2,300 or $2,165 increase per student is what we need to keep up with inflation, depending on what we look at that estimate for this last year. Yep. So what does that mean total dollar-wise? So total dollar-wise, we take the $2,300 that we said amount per student we need to increase to keep up with inflation, multiply it by just our resident students, so 2,161, we get $4.982,000. So when we originally started talking about this, we rounded it to 4.9 million. That's what we surveyed the community and said, give us your feedback, tell us what your thoughts are. And we listened to where the community came in. The community, there was support for 4.9 million, but it wasn't overwhelming support where we weren't sure if it would pass or not. But we also asked the community about 3.9 million, and there was strong support for 3.9 million. The person who helps us with the survey, the statistician who looks at the results, said there was a strong success ratio at 3.9 million. We decided, and the board decided, that we were going to go for 3.9 million, not 4.9. So the amount that's on the referendum question is locked in, had to be locked in January. It's locked in at $3.9 million, not 4.9 million. So you can see with the updated amount, we're still at 4.6 million. So we're still well below what the inflationary increase is. So what happens with that difference is a question that I get a lot. That's where we hope the state steps up and the state budget has some increase. So we'll make up that difference first, and then if that increase is more than the difference between the 4.6 million and the 3.9, then we reduce the increase of the amount of the referendum that we use. So we will adjust that, and if that 7% or 6% that we had factored in for next year comes down, we'll adjust that down even more. So we're going to take whatever the state gives us, and we're going to subtract that off of that number. Does that make sense? Because that's really a complicated understanding. Other districts aren't doing that. They're asking for an amount and doing that amount regardless of what the state does. But we didn't feel that was the right way to go.
Everyone understand that? So most districts would have stayed with the 4.9 or even 5 million. We just wanted to be totally transparent and say, and our board agreed that if we end up getting money from the state, we're going to lower the amount that we would have.
And I would say there's a good likelihood we get some money from the state. We talk to our state level elected officials regularly, and we're hearing they understand the problem, and they're planning to do something. But like I said in that previous slide, a couple slides ago, the governor's proposal isn't enough to make up for the years that we haven't had an increase. So we're not thinking we're going to get enough that we won't have any impact from the referendum, but we think it'll reduce that $3.9 million impact. No, we have to keep going. Okay, so here we talk about the community survey provided the school board with valuable information. This is where we surveyed all the community members, we got their feedback. And I mentioned before, there was some support for 4.9, and it was close whether it would pass or not, but we wanted to go with a more community confidence. The community strongly supported the 3.9, so that's why the board went there. So we think it's important that you know the responses to the survey were listened to, that we take those surveys seriously when we send them out. It's important to know how you feel. And this referendum is all about how you feel. That's what the vote is, really a survey, whether the community supports this additional revenue limit room or not. So that's what we're doing with the survey. We want to make that clear because there are questions, because the survey went out at 4.9 million. We want to make sure people understand that's not what we're asking for. And when you see the question, that won't be the referendum question. It will be 3.9 million. And one other thing I don't think we've mentioned, I want to make sure we're clear on, it's 3.9 million per year for 5 years. And then in 5 years, we have to decide, do we still need this? Can we reduce it? Does it need to increase if inflation's gone like it has recently? What do we need to do? We need to renew it, or it expires?
Well, I think it's important to note, based on everything we said, it's 3.9 per year at the most.
At the most, yes.
It could be significantly less depending on what the state does.
I have a question. That's what I don't understand is if you've already lowered it from 4.9, which you need, to 3.9, and the state kicks in, say, you already, I guess, contracted for that money. Why can't you invest that into some other aspect of a quality education? Why do you have to say, or was that part of the referendum?
That was part of the questions in the
Okay.
surveys, that we felt it was important, that we weren't trying to grow our budget beyond what inflation did. We're trying to keep our education quality where it is. Do we have other things we could do? Yes, there are a lot of things that we feel would be valuable educationally that we could implement. But that's not what this referendum is about. This referendum is about, does the community support continuing what we're doing at the levels we've been doing it? And that would be something that we could explore in a future referendum.
But,
Yeah.
but yeah, I think it's important to go back, just so everyone here is clear and people on the video are clear. Yeah. Depending on what the state does, we are taking off the state from the 4.6, figure, right? Not off the 3.9. So let's say they would give us $1 million, we would still need to levy 3.6 million. Is everybody clear on that? Right?
And right now, the governor's proposal, if it gets adopted, gives us about $1 million for next year. So we'd be at 3.6 million instead of 3.9 if it was approved. But the second year, the increase is much larger, so it gives us over 2 million. So we'd be down to 1.9 million in referendum.
I'm sorry, I'm not quite understanding. So this referendum, so you're saying that per student it's 2,000 per resident student, we're $2,000 short per year.
Yes.
But we're only getting for open enrollment students, we're only getting an increase of 200
But
per year?
they haven't calculated what that is. I don't know.
He's
if
using
they're
that
gonna-
as an
Yeah,
May.
so it could be $1,000. We don't know yet. It's completely unknown where it is, and I'm always conservative in my estimates. I don't want to overestimate that that's going to increase more because it hasn't historically, but we're in historic inflationary numbers where it could go quite a bit more. It all depends on how that calculation statewide goes.
So I guess my overall question is, if we're talking about potentially having to raise our class sizes to 30, 35 kids, like at what space do we say, okay, well, we're only getting 200 for these, 200 extra, or 300 or 500, when it's costing our students 2,100? When do we balance that and say, we're not gonna be accepting these open enrollment anymore so we can keep our education here in Ashwaubenon a smaller class
So
size?
that's a great question, and to be honest, I was at staff meetings in the last week, and I heard that question from staff members as well. What point do we stop accepting open enrollment and just take care of our kids, and does that make financial sense? I'll tell you, with the amount that we get per student on open enrollment, it takes about 10 open enrollment students, or a little less than 10 open enrollment students, to offset one staff member. So if we would curtail or limit our open enrollment, it limits our budget, and we would be more than 31 staff members we'd have to lay off. And the class size increase would be greater than when it is with the open enrollment. So we look at that on a regular basis. What we've used open enrollment to do is fill open seats. So if we have a class size, say at 20 per student in first grade, and we say our class size limit's 22, that means we can have 2 kids in that class, and we haven't changed our staffing at all, but we've increased our revenue so we can cover some of those other costs. So we've used it to fill open seats and keep our district the size it is, so we can keep our programs and all those things. That's been our strategy with open enrollment, to to fill our open seats. We've been very successful in open enrollment. We are one of the biggest open enrollment districts in the state. So we're a district where people want to come to. They can't find houses, but every year we see 20 to 30 students who are open enrolled who move into the district and become residents. So they start open enroll, they finally find a house and they become residents. So we're seeing that draw people into the community and get people started, but it's also filling those open seats and helping us maintain our staff at the house. So while I wish I could say it's gonna go up to $2,000 for open enrollment, I don't believe it's gonna go up that much, but it's still, those open enrollment students are still more than covering the cost of the staffing associated with the students. So the incremental cost of that student is less than the incremental revenue from that student. So we would be worse off if we didn't have it. We'd be better off if we had all residents and we had 3,200 resident students instead of having the open enrollment students, but we don't have that right now. At some point, we expect the community population of resident students to increase, and we have in the past limited number of open enrollment students in grade levels where we've had a large grade level size. So there were 3 years at Parkview that we didn't accept any open enrollment students because we had a couple large grade levels going through Parkview, we just didn't have room. So we've done that, and we see that that's a possibility in the future as we see larger grade levels. Does that make sense?
Yes, until you take away the extra 31 teachers, and then.
Right, but if we eliminated the open enrollment students, we could take away a lot more than 31.
And the class sizes.
Class sizes would be even larger. So,
Because right now,
good
we
question.
have a range, and we're trying to fill that range, and we're using open enrollment to fill those seats.
So right now, with open enrollment per year, we're trying to replace the open enrollment students who are graduating. We're trying to keep that number stable. And that's really about where we're at with open enrollment the last couple of years, is having enough for the seniors in high school who are graduating, having enough new students to fill that number, so we keep that. It's $10 million of revenue in our budget, keep that number consistent from year to year, so we keep our budget, we can keep our programs and not have to lay off staff. So referendum passes, but we would see a significant drop in enrollment, we'd be laying off staff because we'd have less kids and less budget.